We've all heard of a lost city called Atlantis. Plato described its probable location as somewhere in the Atlantic just beyond the Pillars of Hercules, also known as the Strait of Gibraltar. Or was it near Greece? Maybe Antarctica? Or did it ever even exist to begin with? And if it did exist, was it lost to the Great Flood many thousands of years ago? And if it didn't exist, was the tale simply created in antiquity as a message for future civilizations meant to elevate our thinking to a place of greater harmony with our fellow man? A sort of invisible object lesson in morality, or to point us to a belief in a higher power. One thing is for sure, it has found an indelible place of magic in the minds of those who dared ponder the lost city of Atlantis.
Hey everyone, welcome to Edge of Wonder. We are your hosts. I'm Ben.
And I'm Rob. So growing up, you might have seen or heard of Atlantis and how it was mentioned many times throughout your life. Maybe you watched Aquaman recently, or Atlantis, the Lost Empire back in 2001. You remember that?
Yeah, I sure do. Well, maybe you've heard about it in school, in literature, or in the news when researchers claim they found the next Atlantis.
We're not the first people to discuss about Atlantis, and we certainly will not be the last. We'll surface some pretty compelling research done and see how it ties to the source material where Atlantis is mentioned.
So join us as we chase down the clues to figure out if Atlantis was real, where it existed, and what to take away from the story of Atlantis.
So for starters, where does the term Atlantis come from? It's most popularly known from Plato's work. In 359 BC, he mentioned Atlantis in two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias.
Actually, going even further back, in 450 BC, Herodotus created an accurate and detailed map that shows Atlantis, although spelled differently, located west of Libya and south of Europe.
When did the Atlantean civilization exist? In Plato's dialogue, Egyptian priests told Solon that the Atlanteans existed 9,000 years ago. Solon, a Greek lawmaker, lived around 600 BC. So 9600 BC in our time was 11,600 years ago. Dang.
Yeah. So what happened approximately 11,600 years ago? In an interview on London Real, British writer and journalist Graham Hancock highlights the Meltwater Pulse 1b, which is the name for the massive rise in sea levels that happened around 11,600 years ago.
The deluge. It's crazy how accurate Plato's texts are, so either he made up a story about people who coincidentally vanished around the same time the sea levels rose dramatically and caused floods, or it really did happen.
Where could Atlantis be? In Plato's dialogue Critias, he writes that Atlantis was an island in the Atlantic Ocean, quote, situated in front of the straits called the Pillars of Hercules, or as it's now known as the Straits of Gibraltar.
Many researchers theorize and provide arguments that say Atlantis was in the Atlantic Ocean, Greece, Bolivia, the Caribbean, Antarctica, and or Mauritania.
We're not going to cover all of the possible locations here in this episode, but we'll look into one of the most compelling ones in detail.
One of the places that people believe Atlantis existed is the reshot structure, aka the Eye of the Sahara. It was first discovered by Richard Mollard in 1948.
In the new movie Aquaman, there's a slight nod to the idea that one of the Atlantean kingdoms was in the Sahara.
For starters, the reshot structure has the concentric circular structure that looks exactly like how Plato described it. Quote, alternate zones of sea and land, larger and smaller, encircling one another. There were 2 of land and 3 of water.
It's huge, and NASA astronauts have captured images of it which can be seen from space. It's approximately 14.6 miles or 23.5 kilometers in diameter.
And what else is approximately that wide in diameter?
The city of Atlantis, as described in Plato's dialogues. The circular city of Atlantis was 127 stadia in diameter, which is also approximately 14.6 miles or 23.5 kilometers.
There is a slight caveat to this. We looked into some counter arguments that say despite the size of the structure matching, the distances between the concentric rings don't match up. That's a bummer.
Yeah, it does. Here's an image that overlays the arrangement of the concentric rings of land and water on top of the actual reshot structure.
The land itself has changed a lot throughout the years, so we can't completely disregard all of the other compelling evidence.
As the Bright Inside YouTube channel summarizes in his video, there are some facts that make it really plausible for Atlantis to have existed on the reshot structure.
First, we established before that Atlantis existed around the same time the sea level rose dramatically.
One of his viewers pointed out subsurface activity could cause the bedrock or land underneath to rise every year. If you simulated a 1,300-foot rise in sea level on floodmap.net, you can see the map of Atlantis on the existing reshot structure. Shout out to Reddit user Cyocat for finding that one.
Second, the size of the reshot structure matches Plato's measurements as we just stated.
Third, the geography of the reshot structure corresponds to Plato's description of Atlantis being a city of concentric circles of land and water built on a relatively flat land with mountains in the north with some rivers running out and the sea to its south.
Fourth, Atlanteans built their city using red, white, and black rocks native to the land. There are still red and black rocks that exist now in the reshot structure as well as lighter tan rocks.
Fifth, there are many versions of Herodotus' map from 450 BC that shows Atlantis to be west of Libya.
Why this is important is because Herodotus made his map in 450 BC, well before the birth of Plato in 429 BC.
One video by Indie Archaeology shows an independent researcher who visited the reshot structure in person and did on-the-ground reporting.
His video captures the vast flat land surrounded by mountains in the north, as well as artifacts found that prove a past civilization existed there.
He released another video in May 2019 that collects evidence proving that the reshot structure was a lake at the time of Atlantis. He corroborated research from multiple sources and shared images of freshwater fossils found near the reshot structure, which now resides in Nukeshat Museum.
So if you use your imagination, try to picture the Sahara or northern Africa as this vast land with many pockets of water and lush greenery on top.
Now, check out this artist's rendering of what Atlantis might have looked like.
Yeah, Rocio Espin Pinar is the illustrator who drew this beautiful picture of what Atlantis would have looked like back in the day.
So, there you have it. The reshot structure might have been Atlantis.
As a quick reminder, if you're enjoying this video, please be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you can catch new episodes every week. It'll really help us out a lot, especially with all this censorship. We appreciate it.
I know. Thank you, guys. Some notable coincidences is that the Atlas Mountains actually span Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia.
The Atlas Mountains and the surrounding regions previously were the ancient kingdom of Mauritania, not to be confused with modern-day Mauritania spelled with an I and not with an E. I'm confused and probably pronounced that wrong.
I think you got it pretty close. The ancient kingdom of Mauritania dated back to 27 BC and had a legendary first king named, ready for this? Atlas.
Awesome name. Now keep this in mind, the reshot structure where people believed to be the original home of Atlantis is located not too far southwest, off in modern day Mauritania. And guess what? The first king of Atlantis was also named Atlas.
On the Atlas Mountains, Susan Seawright did a PhD thesis paper on the prehistoric rock art of Morocco. There, she found a large number of engravings showing chariots.
Another paper by Helen Anderson of the British Museum estimated there to be around 1,200 depictions of painted and engraving chariots in the Saharan rock art, a number which has doubled in recent years.
The people of Atlantis were said to have enjoyed chariot racing, and Atlantis is described to have a giant circular arena for chariot racing.
So in Plato's dialogue, he talks about how there are 5 pairs of twins along with their descendants that ruled over different kingdoms. That supports the theory that Atlantean kingdoms could exist across the world.
That makes Atlantis more of an era or a dynasty rather than just one location as what most people believe. It could be similar to how in Aquaman, like the movie Aquaman, there were different kingdoms in different territories all around the world.
In our previous episode of Underwater Civilizations, we talked about how there are ancient pyramid structures found all around the world and how many of these seem to be built in a similar fashion with similar markings.
Looking back, some of those ancient underwater structures like the Yonaguni monuments were estimated to be more than 10,000 years old. Could those various underwater structures be the remnants of other Atlantean kingdoms?
And if so, wouldn't it be safe to say that nearly the entire civilization was Atlantis? Also, this would make sense why some people claim to have found evidence of Atlantis on various continents.
Even director James Cameron claims to have found evidence of it in his 2017 documentary Atlantis Rising, in which his crew found over 7,000 temples on the island of Sardinia, which is off the coast of Italy.
Cameron believes that this location matches up with Plato's description perfectly. They did find a very old underwater harbor with some broken anchors off the island.
And on the island, they found ancient ruins with strange markings and unusual artifacts. But we'll continue our adventure looking into other possible Atlantean kingdoms around the world in an upcoming episode.
Right, such as Antarctica. As many people believe, this too was the lost city of Atlantis. But if you missed the episode about ancient civilizations and underwater pyramids found around the world, go back and check it out.
Our takeaway after doing all of this research and talking to so many people such as David Wilcock, Brad Olson, Robert Schock, and Corey Good, and so many more, is that if Atlantis was real, then it was more of an era of human civilization than just one continent.
And if so, this could show why so many geologists and explorers claim to believe that they have found evidence of Atlantis in different parts of the world. However, many mainstream sources will claim the descriptions of Atlantis in Plato's dialogues are false and it was written and told as an allegory.
It's easy to write off all the descriptions in Plato's dialogue as fiction because there might be certain parts that are harder to believe or prove. But when you really start putting all of this research together, at least we can all say with certainty that there is solid evidence that ancient civilizations did exist.
Even if you don't believe Atlantis to be real, isn't the lesson of Atlantis still worth sharing? Also, many people have claimed to have detailed visions, dreams, and connections to Atlantis their whole lives.
This too is something worth mentioning and keeping notes on. The first book I ever got from the library was about Atlantis. So this is another topic. Why do so many of us feel so connected to Atlantis? Did we have a past life there?
But we wanted to leave our understandings of some thought-provoking excerpts from Plato's dialogue, which says, quote, "Good things are increased by general amity combined with virtue, whereas the eager pursuit and worship of these goods not only causes the goods themselves to diminish, but makes virtue also to perish with them." Watch that over a couple times if you didn't hear it, because it's actually really important.
Yeah, it is. So in other words, living a virtuous life will be rewarded, and needlessly pursuing things will bring about the opposite effect. Could it be, in the beginning, the Atlanteans started off living virtuous lives, quote, with a portion of divinity within them, but then were corrupted over time and their human temper became dominant?
The Egyptian priests had this to say: "There have been and there will be many and diverse destructions of mankind, of which the greatest are by fire and water, and lesser ones by countless other means," unquote.
So how we understood the ending is that Plato's saying that, quote, the god of gods who reigns by law punished the Atlanteans for becoming too corrupted through a periodic flood. So, could have this been the real reason for the Great Flood?
It's so fascinating to think about how the texts align the cyclical occurrences of natural disasters with the rise and decline of a civilization.
Right, you can find all of this in cultures and religions all around the world.
But where do you think Atlantis is? And what did you think about the moral of the story of Atlantis?
Also, do you have any memories or felt a connection to Atlantis your whole life? Share with us in the comments below.
We've got a ton more Atlantis content to surface to y'all, so with that, we'll see you out
on the edge
of an interview with Brad Olson on Atlantis, because we're gonna have one pretty soon.
Yep, you guys look out for that. It's going to be awesome. We go into some cool stuff with him, including Antarctica.
Hey guys, hope you're enjoying this episode.
If you want to watch the rest and get access to our full catalog of content with hundreds of videos that will keep you entertained for hours and hours, subscribe to rise.tv.
Also, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you don't miss a single new drop.
Yeah, and we'll see you out on the edge.